Once betrayed and forgotten, poor wife became a billionaire. Now she's back to make them regret it. They said she was nothing but a naive girl, a foolish bride with empty pockets and grand dreams, nothing more than a stepping stone for a powerful family. They stripped her of dignity, love and belonging, casting her aside when she was at her most vulnerable. Yet beneath her tattered pride and hidden tears, she harbored an unbreakable spirit. Years later, a name they once scoffed at has become the talk of boardrooms, fashion galas, and financial headlines around the world. And now she's back, not for mere vengeance, but to set the record straight once and for all. This is Elizabeth Addison's story. Elizabeth Nichols grew up on the outskirts of Rosemore, a quiet, mid-sized city known more for its modest suburbs than shining skyscrapers. She lived in a tiny house with her mother, Fiona Nichols, a seamstress who did her best to raise her daughter with dignity and hope, despite their humble means. From an early age, Elizabeth learned the delicate dance between meager resources and unyielding ambition. She watched her mother stitch intricate wedding gowns for wealthy clients, while they themselves could hardly afford new clothes. Each evening, she'd curl up next to her mother, listening to Fiona's encouraging whispers about faith, love, and the power of dreams. Despite their struggles, Elizabeth remained bright-eyed. She believed that one day all her mother's sacrifices would pay off. She spent her teenage years devouring novels about heroines who rose above circumstance to create their own destinies. The characters' triumphs fueled Elizabeth's fervent wish for a future where she would not only stand on her own feet, but also lift her mother out of poverty. It was in her first year of college that she met Daniel Addison. Tall, self-assured and charming, Daniel was everything Elizabeth had only read about in stories. He was the son of Cornelius Addison, a prominent entrepreneur rumored to hold significant stakes in various industries around Rosemore: real estate, logistics, and even a small chain of supermarkets. Yet Daniel never flaunted his family's wealth when he first encountered Elizabeth at a campus volunteering event. He admired her kindness, she admired his confidence. Their connection was swift and potent. Within months they shared an unspoken bond that felt unbreakable. Though Elizabeth worried about their stark difference in backgrounds, Daniel assured her that his family wasn't as traditional and judgmental as rumors suggested. He painted pictures of a bright future together, one in which her sweet spirit and his business acumen would blend perfectly. When Elizabeth introduced Daniel to her mother Fiona, she saw the spark of hope in Fiona's eyes. Fiona took Daniel's hand and said, "Take care of my girl. She's all I have." Daniel responded with what seemed to be genuine warmth, promising to support Elizabeth's dreams just as much as his own. Her mother's blessing and Daniel's reassurance calmed Elizabeth's lingering doubts. But all was not well in the Addison household. Unbeknownst to Elizabeth, Daniel's mother, Catherine Addison, harbored reservations about her son's new girlfriend. She had heard from her social circle that Elizabeth was poor, practically penniless aside from her scholarship. Catherine believed that the Addison name deserved a more refined match, someone from a family of equal stature. Daniel's father, Cornelius, was marginally more open-minded, but still believed that marriage was as much a financial alliance as it was a union of love. However, Daniel seemed to overlook his parents' hushed disapproval. He proposed to Elizabeth soon after they graduated, an intimate affair by the lakeside, where he presented her with a modest but meaningful ring. Tears stung Elizabeth's eyes as she agreed, convinced that she had found her forever partner. The wedding planning commenced. They opted for a small ceremony in a local chapel, wanting something that felt personal. Fiona hand-sewed Elizabeth's wedding gown, putting all her love and skill into every stitch. Though it wasn't the grand event Catherine desired for her only son, Daniel insisted it was what he and Elizabeth wanted: simplicity, sincerity, and love. Everything seemed perfect, or so Elizabeth thought. On their wedding day, the promise of a happily ever after radiated in the chapel. Cornelius and Catherine, at least on the surface, kept their judgments under wraps, even if Catherine's forced smile was too tight to be genuine. For a fleeting moment, Elizabeth believed she had bridged the chasm between poverty and privilege, forging a future that would honor both her mother's humble background and the Addison lineage. But hidden resentments have a way of showing themselves, and the Addison family was no exception. Little did Elizabeth know, her wedding day would be the last moment of pure joy she would experience in that household for a long, long time. Married life with Daniel began in what felt like a dream. They lived in a modest but elegant townhouse near the Addison family's main estate. The walls were adorned with tasteful artwork chosen by Catherine herself, who grudgingly supported their new living arrangement to keep them close under her watchful eye. Elizabeth decorated the living room with bright flowers, determined to infuse a sense of warmth into this new chapter. Initially, Daniel was the picture of a loving husband. Every day, he'd leave for his role in Addison logistics with a kiss on Elizabeth's forehead, whispering sweet nothings about how their future was going to be magnificent. He encouraged her to pursue her passion, designing clothes much like her mother. It was Elizabeth's secret dream to open a small boutique where she could sell her own designs and perhaps one day collaborate with other local talents. Yet, as weeks turned to months, Elizabeth noticed subtle cracks in Daniel's demeanor. The sweet texts he sent her during the day gradually ceased. He came home later and later, always blaming meetings, traffic, or sudden errands. Each time he offered an excuse, he'd give Elizabeth a reassuring pat on the shoulder, as though she were a child needing placation. She tried to be understanding, reminding herself that building a career in a competitive family business required sacrifice. One chilly autumn evening, as Elizabeth sat alone in their townhouse waiting for Daniel, she received a call from his younger sister, Andrea Addison. A free-spirited socialite with a sharp tongue, Andrea was the gossip queen of Rosemore's elite scene. Andrea's voice cut through the silence with a mischievous edge. "Beth, darling, I saw Daniel tonight at the Olive Lounge. He wasn't alone." Elizabeth's throat went dry. "Maybe he's meeting a client." Andrea let out a musical laugh. "A client, yes, but a rather glamorous one. Miss Ophelia Summers, if you must know. She was hanging onto his arm like it was a lifeline." Ophelia Summers was a rising star in the local fashion world, lauded for her extravagant designs and rumored to be the Addison family's new favorite collaborator for some philanthropic ventures. Elizabeth felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She forced herself to remain calm on the phone, but after hanging up, her mind spun in a whirlwind of doubt. Was Daniel just networking, or was there something more? Daniel walked in an hour later, reeking of expensive perfume that wasn't his. Elizabeth remembered her mother's lessons in humility. She asked Daniel gently about his evening. He brushed it off as a business meeting. No matter how many details Elizabeth tried to glean, Daniel kept his answers short, evading eye contact. In the days that followed, Catherine Addison made the tension worse. During a family dinner, she dropped pointed remarks about how Ophelia's recent achievements were simply breathtaking and how some people found it difficult to keep pace with real talent. Elizabeth felt every remark like a thinly veiled jab at her own aspirations. When she tried to join the conversation, Catherine quickly changed the subject, as though Elizabeth were invisible. Daniel, too, seemed distracted throughout the dinner, nodding absently to whatever Catherine said, never once defending Elizabeth or even showing concern for her discomfort. His father, Cornelius, gave the occasional grunt, but said nothing significant, absorbed in swirling the wine in his glass. Back at the townhouse, Elizabeth confronted Daniel gently. "If there's something going on with you and Ophelia, I'd rather know the truth than live like this." She expected either an angry retort or a heartfelt denial, but Daniel just sighed. "You're overthinking. I'm just handling some new ventures for the Addison family. Ophelia is a key partner right now. My parents want me to ensure things go smoothly, that's all." His words didn't soothe her growing unease, but Elizabeth, ever trusting, desperately wanted to believe him. She surrendered to the comfort of the half-truth he offered. After all, she loved Daniel, and love often demands hope in the face of glaring uncertainties. But the Addison mansion was rife with hushed conversations and predatory smiles whenever Elizabeth stepped foot in it. Even the household staff seemed to pity her, glancing away when she walked past. She felt suffocated, perpetually on the outside looking in. Andrea's cryptic hints, Catherine's coldness, and Daniel's shifting eyes all spoke of secrets that threatened the fragile foundation of Elizabeth's new life. Still, Elizabeth clung to the promise of that wedding day, the vow that Daniel would stand by her side, building a life fueled by both love and dreams. Little did she know, the seeds of betrayal had already begun to sprout, and her trust in Daniel was about to be tested in ways she never saw coming. The turning point arrived on a stormy evening in late November. Elizabeth had been working on her sketches for a potential boutique collection, simple yet elegant dresses inspired by her mother's seamstress legacy. She was excited to show Daniel, hoping her passion could mend the rift growing between them. But as time ticked by, the rain outside turned into a deluge, and Daniel still wasn't home. She tried calling his phone multiple times. Voicemail. Texts went unanswered. Fear coiled in her chest, blending with anger. Where could he be? She called Andrea, but her sister-in-law did not pick up. By midnight, Elizabeth's anxiety reached a fever pitch. Unable to bear the silence any longer, she grabbed her coat, hailed a taxi, and headed to Addison Logistics' corporate offices. There, through the rain-splattered windows of the deserted parking lot, she spotted Daniel's car. The lights in his office suite still glowed. With her heart pounding, she ascended in the elevator. As she reached the corridor, low voices echoed from behind the door. She recognized Daniel's voice and Ophelia Summers's laughter. Elizabeth pressed her ear to the door, her hand trembling on the handle. She wanted to barge in, but fear of what she might see gripped her like a vice. Ophelia's voice drifted out, seductive and confident. You know, darling, you can't keep up this charade forever. Once our deal is through, you'll be free, free to be with me, free to pursue whatever your heart desires. Elizabeth felt her stomach twist. Daniel's reply, though muffled, was telling. Ophelia, you know my family expects me to keep up appearances. My father was adamant that the marriage made us look grounded. But it's been nothing but a drag on my ambitions. Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes. She heard the rustle of movement, the unmistakable sound of a kiss. Fury, heartbreak, and disbelief swirled inside her. She pushed open the door. The scene confirmed her worst suspicions. Daniel and Ophelia locked in an embrace, a bottle of champagne on the table. Shock painted their faces when they saw Elizabeth standing in the threshold, drenched from the rain, eyes brimming with betrayal. Daniel sputtered, Elizabeth, I can explain. Ophelia merely folded her arms, smirking, as though she relished the moment. Well, this is awkward, she said with shameless nonchalance. Without waiting to hear more, Elizabeth spun on her heels and ran. She stumbled into the elevator, tears blurring her vision. Daniel chased after her, but was too slow. By the time the elevator doors opened at the lobby, Elizabeth was already sprinting into the storm. Back at the townhouse, Elizabeth's grief transformed into determination. She refused to stay in a sham marriage. She packed a small suitcase, heart shattering with every item she grabbed. For a moment, she paused over her wedding ring. How could something that once symbolized love now feel like a heavy shackle? She tossed it on the kitchen countertop, just as Daniel burst through the front door, water dripping from his coat. His eyes flickered from her suitcase to the ring. A flash of panic crossed his face, but he tried to maintain composure. Look, it's not what it seems. You have to hear me out. Elizabeth clenched her fists. I heard everything, she hissed. I was just a convenient placeholder, wasn't I? The poor girl who made you look compassionate to your parents, made you seem grounded in front of potential investors, while Ophelia was the real deal. He tried to approach her, but she stepped back. Don't you dare come closer, she spat, tears streaking down her cheeks. You fooled me into loving you. A bitter laugh escaped Daniel's lips. You think this is just about love? My father's business was at stake. The Addison name was losing favor with the public. We needed to polish our image, and your sweet rags-to-riches story was perfect. You benefited too. You were no longer struggling for rent, were you? Elizabeth felt as though she'd been punched in the gut. The cruelty in his words was unimaginable. Then you shouldn't mind if I leave, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Daniel, seemingly caught off guard by her resolve, looked momentarily stricken. Fine, he mumbled, though a flicker of regret lurked in his eyes. Do what you want. She walked out into the rain. The final image burned into her mind. Daniel standing in the living room, ring on the countertop, remnants of a marriage now irreparably broken. Elizabeth had no clue where she would go. The only thing she knew for certain was that the life she once cherished was over. The Addison family might have branded her as disposable, but they had yet to see the fire that heartbreak can ignite. Elizabeth found herself at Rosemore Station, suitcase in hand, battered by both the storm and the anguish flooding her heart. The train station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, offering little comfort. She had no plan, no home, and no sense of direction. What she did have was a phone, clutched tightly in her trembling fingers. She dialed her mother's number. Fiona Nichols answered on the third ring, and the soothing warmth of her voice was all it took for Elizabeth to break down completely. She told her mother everything about Daniel's betrayal, the heartbreak, the lies. Fiona, devastated yet supportive, told her to come home. But Elizabeth refused. She knew her mother's tiny rental space barely had room for one, let alone two. Fiona was already working extra shifts at the tailor shop just to keep up with her medication bills. I'll figure something out, Elizabeth managed between sobs. I'll keep you posted, Mom. I just need some space to think. She hung up before her mother could protest further. Deep down, she was determined not to burden Fiona with her mess. She had to stand on her own 2 feet now. As she paced the station, her tears eventually subsiding into a hollow exhaustion, a voice called out, "Elizabeth? Is that really you?" Turning around, she came face to face with James Henderson, a former college acquaintance. They had volunteered together during orientation week, but lost touch after graduation. James had always admired her dedication to social causes, and they'd shared occasional conversations about life's aspirations and small campus gossip. Wearing a worn-out leather jacket and carrying an old messenger bag, James looked at Elizabeth's tear-stained face and the suitcase by her side with immediate concern. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, leading her to a nearby bench. The story spilled out of her in broken fragments: betrayal, heartbreak, humiliation. Throughout her explanation, James listened attentively, his gaze radiating empathy. "You need a place to stay," he concluded gently. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes stinging with fresh tears. "I live in a shared apartment with my sister, Helena, and her fiancé, Marcus," James explained. "It's modest, but we have a couch you can crash on until you figure out your next steps." Helena and Marcus welcomed Elizabeth with open arms. Despite having only known her through James's recollections, they sympathized with her situation. They offered her a warm meal and a corner of their living room where she could set her suitcase and attempt to collect her shattered self. It wasn't much, just a small couch near a coffee table stacked with magazines and half-finished crochet projects. But for Elizabeth, it felt like the first genuine comfort she'd experienced in weeks. In the days that followed, Helena helped Elizabeth search for job opportunities in the local classifieds. Elizabeth discovered that her skills in design and her unwavering determination might land her a position as an assistant in a small boutique owned by a woman named Amelia Carter. Amelia was known for her handcrafted fashion line that prioritized ethics and sustainability, values that resonated deeply with Elizabeth. James, meanwhile, offered moral support. He invited her to share coffee in the mornings, easing her into conversations about hope, resilience, and fresh starts. It was during one of these coffee chats that Elizabeth's tears took on a new meaning. They were no longer just from grief, but from overwhelming gratitude. After losing everything, discovering that kindness still existed in the world felt like a lifeline. One evening, as she watched Helena and Marcus prepare dinner, Elizabeth realized that she was not alone. Here were people who barely knew her, yet treated her like family. She resolved not to waste their compassion. If she was to overcome this heartbreak, she had to believe in her own worth, in her own potential. Summoning courage, Elizabeth decided to call Amelia Carter's boutique the following morning. She introduced herself, expressed her passion for design, and requested an in-person interview. To her relief, Amelia sounded intrigued and agreed to meet her later that week. Although the salary was minimal and the hours irregular, Elizabeth hoped this small step would be her ticket to rebuilding a life on her terms. She went to bed that night with a renewed sense of purpose, the memory of Daniel's betrayal still fresh, but gradually overshadowed by a flicker of hope. Betrayed, forgotten, and cast out by the Addison family, Elizabeth Nichols Addison was determined to forge a new destiny. This time, it would be on her own merit, and she would never allow anyone to shatter her spirit again. Elizabeth woke up early on the day of her interview with Amelia Carter. A flutter of nerves and excitement coursed through her as she quickly tidied up the makeshift couch bed. Helena, sipping coffee in the kitchen, wished her luck. "You've got this," she reassured. "Amelia's a good person. She'll see your talent." Tugging on a borrowed blazer from Helena, Elizabeth made her way to the boutique, an inviting sunlit space called Carter Co. It was tucked in a quaint corner of downtown Rosemore, far from the towering corporate centers that defined the Addison empire. Mannequins in the window displayed elegant dresses with delicate embroidery, each piece unique, artisanal, and somehow brimming with soul. Amelia Carter, a woman in her early 30s with a warm smile and a bohemian flair, greeted Elizabeth. They sat at a small table by the window, patterns and fabric swatches strewn about. Amelia asked about Elizabeth's experience and design philosophy. Summoning her confidence, Elizabeth presented her sketches, pieces she had worked on before her marriage collapsed. She spoke of her mother's seamstress background, how she'd learned the importance of detail and quality from a young age. Amelia studied each sketch with interest. "You have a real eye for silhouette and texture," she observed. "Our boutique's about more than just making pretty clothes, though. We want to support women artisans in underprivileged communities to ensure fair wages for everyone involved in the supply chain." Elizabeth's eyes lit up. "That's exactly the kind of environment I've dreamed of working in," she said earnestly. "I want to use fashion as a means to empower people, just like my mother did in her own small way." Amelia, clearly impressed, offered her a trial position on the spot. It was part-time to start, but if Elizabeth could prove herself, she might move into a full-time designer's role. Over the next few weeks, Elizabeth immersed herself in every task Amelia handed her, organizing fabrics, liaising with local tailors, and even stepping in to help with marketing photos. She stayed late to refine her sketches, determined to impress Amelia with her creativity and dedication. Word slowly spread among the boutique's clientele about a talented new designer brimming with fresh ideas. Meanwhile, James Henderson continued to be a steady pillar of support. He'd wait outside the boutique some evenings, ready to walk with Elizabeth to the bus stop, discussing life and offering encouragement. He never pried into her past, never asked for details about her heartbreak unless she volunteered them. It was a refreshing change from the Addison family, who had always demanded Elizabeth conform to their image or suffer their scorn. But despite her newfound momentum, Elizabeth was not without private struggles. She had legal matters to settle. Daniel hadn't contacted her since she left, which was both a relief and a painful reminder of how disposable he deemed her. She tried to push thoughts of him aside, though the lingering sense of betrayal gnawed at her. Late at night, she'd remember his sweet words at the beginning of their marriage and wonder how it all could have been a lie. One afternoon she received a summons from the Addison family's attorneys, instructing her to sign the divorce papers. The Addison name apparently could not afford a drawn-out scandal. reading the neatly typed documents, her eyes stung with tears of rage and sorrow. There was no mention of any settlement for her. Why would they bother? She was just the poor girl they'd used for good PR. Pride swelled in her chest. She wouldn't accept pity anyway. Let them have their name. She wanted none of it. Amelia, ever perceptive, found Elizabeth silently weeping over the papers in a corner of the boutique. Sitting down beside her, Amelia offered a reassuring pat on the hand. "You're stronger than they think, Elizabeth. This might be painful, but it's also your chance to start over completely. Sign those papers if you want, or fight for your rights if you must. But remember, you are not defined by the Addison name." That night, Elizabeth penned her signature with trembling fingers. In that moment, she felt a mixture of freedom and heartbreak so vast it threatened to consume her. But she gritted her teeth and reminded herself of her new path, the one that involved forging a name for herself, unburdened by those who had so cruelly cast her aside. Little did she know that this small boutique would be the seed of something far greater, a global empire that would one day make the Addison family regret every ounce of their betrayal. Months passed, and Elizabeth poured her heart into Carter Co. Her designs caught the eye of a local fashion blogger named Jessica Montes, whose glowing reviews on social media began to attract a broader clientele. Demand soared, and Amelia expanded the boutique's online presence, featuring Elizabeth's dresses as limited edition items that sold out within hours of their release. It became clear that Elizabeth's talent was something special, and Amelia was determined to nurture it. Simultaneously, James introduced Elizabeth to a few of his connections. A long-time volunteer at various women's shelters, James believed in merging business with community outreach. He connected Elizabeth with a group of local charities that supported low-income women aspiring to learn tailoring and design. Touched by the mission, Elizabeth began hosting free workshops, teaching basic sewing and embroidery techniques. The workshops became an instant success, forging a loyal network of supporters who admired Elizabeth for her generosity and vision. Yet, the Addison shadow loomed. On a brisk Wednesday afternoon, as Elizabeth was adjusting a mannequin display, she noticed a familiar figure crossing the street toward the boutique, Andrea Addison. Andrea strutted in, looking both smug and somewhat contrite. She glanced around the store with a subtle air of superiority, though her curiosity was undeniable. Elizabeth greeted her with a polite, if cool, "Hello, Andrea. What brings you here?" Andrea's gaze traveled over racks of dresses. "Well, I heard rumors about this fancy new designer in town, and imagine my surprise when I found out it was you." Elizabeth arched an eyebrow. "I'm sure you're just dying to report back to Catherine," she said, bitterness creeping into her voice. A slight flush tinted Andrea's cheeks. "Look, I'm not here to stir the pot. Truth be told, Daniel's been difficult. He's throwing money around with Ophelia and focusing on some big expansions. Mother's health has been poor. Stress, they say. Father's not the same. And, well, the Addison name isn't exactly shining the way it used to." She paused, fiddling with the strap of her designer handbag. "I never thought you'd actually land on your feet, let alone shine like this." Elizabeth studied Andrea's face, trying to discern sincerity behind the polished veneer. "Well, you and your family taught me a lot about survival," she said tersely. "Is that all you came here for?" Andrea took in a slow breath. "I just wanted to see how you were doing. And maybe warn you, my mother might try to contact you. She still believes you owe the family an explanation for leaving so suddenly." A dry laugh escaped Elizabeth. "An explanation? I think we both know they owe me one." After Andrea left, Elizabeth's hands trembled. The encounter brought back a flood of memories she'd hoped to bury, memories of Catherine's icy disapproval, Daniel's betrayal, and the humiliating facade she'd been part of. But if the Addison family's empire was in turmoil, she felt neither schadenfreude nor sorrow. She simply felt resolved. She would continue forging her own path no matter what they thought. Soon, that path took an exciting new turn. A well-known boutique chain from the neighboring city of Belmont reached out to Amelia, expressing interest in stocking Elizabeth's designs. The buyer, impressed by the social mission behind each garment, wanted to feature Elizabeth's line in all 10 of their high-end stores. It was a monumental step up, one that required a major boost in production. With Amelia's blessing, Elizabeth recruited more local seamstresses, including some graduates from her free workshops. The new mini-collective buzzed with energy. For the first time, Elizabeth experienced the thrill of watching her designs come to life on a larger scale. She felt gratitude for Amelia's unwavering faith and a burning desire to succeed, not just to prove the Addison family wrong, but to uplift the community that had embraced her. Late nights were spent drafting business proposals, negotiating fabric deals, and strategizing marketing campaigns. James often stayed by her side, bringing sandwiches or coffee, reminding her to take breaks. On one such night, after they wrapped up a particularly grueling negotiation call, Elizabeth looked at James with a soft smile. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." He shrugged, returning her smile. "You did all this on your own, Elizabeth. I'm just here to cheer you on and help where I can." In that moment, she realized just how meaningful James's friendship had become. He was dependable, gentle, and valued her for who she was, not for what she could do for him. The contrast with Daniel's manipulative ways was stark. Still, Elizabeth kept a protective wall around her heart. Betrayal left scars, and love seemed too fragile a concept to trust again. She focused on her business, letting her ambition and creativity guide her, determined to keep her guard up. Yet little did she know, destiny had bigger plans for her heart and for her business, plans that would catapult her into a realm the Addison family never dreamed possible for the once-forgotten wife they had cast aside. 6 months into the partnership with the Belmont boutique chain, Elizabeth's designs had garnered a loyal following. Fashion influencers posted photos wearing her dresses, praising their exquisite craftsmanship and ethical production process. Online sales skyrocketed, forcing Amelia and Elizabeth to hire additional staff. To keep up with demand, they expanded the workshop space, allowing more women from disadvantaged backgrounds to learn, earn, and flourish. A pivotal moment arrived when Grace Lynn, a renowned fashion editor from Belmont magazine, visited Carter Co. The editorial staff at Belmont had been tracking Elizabeth's rise, intrigued by the rags-to-riches narrative that was quietly circulating in the fashion world. Grace spent hours talking to Elizabeth, observing her design process and meeting the seamstresses. "Your story is remarkable," Grace said, notebook in hand. "From a small boutique to potentially one of the most promising ethical fashion lines in the country, this is exactly the story our readers love." Amelia beamed with pride as Grace snapped photos and asked more questions. Elizabeth, still modest, emphasized that it was a group effort, praising Amelia, James, and everyone else who supported her. Grace nodded, duly noting Elizabeth's humility. "We're planning a multi-page feature," Grace finally revealed. "This could go nationwide if the response is good." News of the upcoming Belmont feature circulated quickly, sparking both excitement and a bit of anxiety. Elizabeth redoubled her efforts, wanting every stitch to be perfect. On a bustling Tuesday morning, as she and Amelia were reviewing final sketches for the magazine shoot, Elizabeth received an unexpected phone call. An authoritative voice introduced herself as Dr. Regina Porter from a philanthropic foundation based in New York. "We've been following your progress, Doctor," Porter explained. "Our foundation invests in women-led enterprises that prioritize social impact. We'd like to discuss a potential partnership, perhaps even significant funding to help you scale." Elizabeth felt her heart hammer. This was the kind of break that could catapult Carter Co. from a local brand to a national, even international presence. She set up a meeting, and within a week, Dr. Porter arrived in Rosemore with her associate, a shrewd but charismatic venture capitalist named Malik Davis. At the meeting, Dr. Porter's warm demeanour and genuine interest in social welfare put Elizabeth at ease. Malik, on the other hand, was more direct, asking pointed questions about profit margins, supply chains, and scalability. Elizabeth answered each question with a mix of honesty and ambition. By the end, Dr. Porter and Malik seemed thoroughly impressed. "We're prepared to invest a substantial sum," Dr. Porter said, "but we'll need more than just a boutique strategy. We need a plan that can be replicated internationally." Elizabeth exchanged glances with Amelia, both brimming with excitement. "We're open to that," Elizabeth replied confidently. "We want to bring ethically sourced materials from all over the world, empower local communities, and still maintain the couture-level quality. If you help us, we can make it happen." Within a month, the partnership was signed. Elizabeth worked day and night on a comprehensive business plan, detailing expansions in manufacturing, e-commerce, and additional training programs for underprivileged women. In exchange, the foundation provided capital, contacts, and valuable mentorship. Amelia, while proud, knew the business had grown beyond her original vision. She entrusted most decision-making to Elizabeth, recognizing that her protégé's boundless ambition could take Carter Co. to heights she never imagined. The synergy was electric. New employees were hired and production facilities were upgraded, all while preserving the personal, artisan touch that defined their brand. James came aboard full-time, overseeing community outreach and international charitable initiatives. Each day felt like a triumphant climb, a testament to Elizabeth's relentless drive and unwavering moral compass. Meanwhile, whispers of Elizabeth's meteoric rise began to reach the Addison household. Catherine Addison, worried about rumors that the brand captivating the nation was owned by her former daughter-in-law, cornered Daniel in his office. "You must put an end to this gossip," she demanded, eyes icy. "Do something. The Addison name can't be overshadowed by the woman we so graciously lifted from poverty." But Daniel, consumed by his own problems, Ophelia's extravagant spending, stalled business negotiations, could only give a non-committal shrug. "What do you expect me to do? Offer her hush money?" He smirked coldly. "Elizabeth won't be easily bought now, and frankly, my dear mother, you underestimated her from the start." Catherine's lips thinned. "Fine. Then we'll have to handle it another way." Thus, a dark cloud began gathering on the horizon. As Elizabeth prepared to take her brand to a global stage, the Addison family schemed to protect their name and erase any chance of being overshadowed. But the seeds they had sown of betrayal, greed, and underestimation were about to come back in a way they never expected. With the foundation's backing, Elizabeth launched an aggressive expansion. They partnered with ethically minded artisan groups in Kenya, Peru, and Thailand, each adding unique cultural elements to Elizabeth's designs. The brand's new name, Eleanor Rose, a combination of Fiona Nichols' middle name and the symbol of blooming hope, glittered on tags worldwide. Within a year, Elizabeth's dresses graced the runways of international fashion weeks, garnering critical acclaim for their fusion of luxury and social responsibility. Belle Monde magazine featured Elizabeth in a spectacular spread, dubbing her the heart of ethical fashion. Sales soared further, and the philanthropic wing of Eleanor Rose provided scholarships for women in underprivileged communities. Media outlets clamored for interviews. Elizabeth's journey from a simple seamstress's daughter to a global fashion mogul resonated powerfully. It was at this peak that the Addison family unleashed their plan. One morning, Elizabeth woke to a flurry of messages. A scathing article had appeared in a Rosemore business tabloid accusing Eleanor Rose of exploiting foreign labor. The piece was riddled with vague claims referencing anonymous sources who alleged unsafe conditions in overseas workshops. Elizabeth's heart pounded. She knew every workshop was vetted and regularly audited. The entire premise of her brand revolved around fair wages and safe working conditions. Amelia, James and the team scrambled to address the allegations, gathering documentation and testimonies from artisans worldwide. They released a public statement categorically denying the claims and invited reputable journalists to visit the facilities themselves. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted in the public's mind. Investors grew wary. Dr. Porter and Malik phoned Elizabeth with concerns. "We're with you," Malik said, "but you need to handle this quickly. Public perception can topple even the strongest business if left unchecked." As Elizabeth battled the smear campaign, an unexpected ally emerged. Andrea Addison. She reached out to Elizabeth secretly, providing documents and emails indicating that Catherine had orchestrated the tabloid hit piece through a shell company affiliated with Addison Logistics. Andrea explained, "Mother wanted to discredit you, to make sure your success didn't tarnish the Addison name by comparison." Elizabeth felt a surge of anger, mingled with a grim validation. She had known Catherine was ruthless, but to sabotage an enterprise that helped so many vulnerable communities was beyond cruel. Using Andrea's evidence, Elizabeth countered the accusations publicly. Legitimate news outlets picked up the story, framing her as a businesswoman under siege by malicious rivals. Sympathy poured in from fans, activists, and even some of the Addison Logistics employees who admired Elizabeth's ethical practices. When confronted with the evidence, Catherine Addison remained defiant, refusing to comment to the press. Daniel, on the other hand, found his position in Addison Logistics precarious as the scandal dragged the family's name through the mud. Meanwhile, public sympathy for Elizabeth soared, transforming her into not just a designer, but a figure of resilience and truth in the industry. Although the smear campaign rattled Elizabeth, it also solidified her brand's reputation. In a grand gesture of transparency, Eleanor Rose opened its doors to auditors from international organizations, proving their compliance with ethical standards. The final reports were glowing, effectively discrediting Catherine's false allegations. Investors regained confidence, and consumers responded with an outpouring of support. Sales surged higher than ever before. James was with Elizabeth every step of the way, offering quiet reassurances when she'd break down in private, exhausted by the emotional toll. "You've faced betrayal before," he reminded her gently. "You didn't let it destroy you then, and you won't now." As the storm began to calm, Elizabeth found herself at yet another turning point. The brand had grown beyond the boutique's humble beginnings. It was now a global powerhouse, with Elizabeth poised to join the ranks of fashion's elite. Through it all, she remained true to her mission, merging opulence with a conscience. But she knew one last confrontation was inevitable. The Addison family, especially Catherine, would not relinquish their vendetta so easily. Rumors swirled that Daniel's business expansions had failed, leaving Addison Logistics in financial jeopardy. The local press buzzed with speculation that Elizabeth, now a billionaire by virtue of Eleanor Rose's valuation, might buy out Addison Logistics as an ultimate revenge. The mere idea left her torn between righteous indignation and the moral high ground she'd tried so hard to maintain. Yet, deep in her heart, she believed in justice, that those who sowed cruelty and deception would one day face the consequences of their own actions. And as much as she ached to see them suffer the same humiliation they'd once inflicted upon her, a part of her yearned for a resolution where she could finally lay to rest the ghosts of her past. A year and a half after Elizabeth first launched Eleanor Rose globally, her life had transformed in ways she never imagined. Financial success, industry acclaim, and philanthropic accolades poured in. She stood on stages worldwide, delivering keynote speeches about ethical entrepreneurship. Yet, under the polished exterior, she remained the same humble soul who once watched her mother sew dresses late into the night. When news broke that Addison Logistics was on the brink of collapse, plummeting stocks, mismanaged projects, and a board exodus, Elizabeth felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Daniel had apparently gambled heavily on untested ventures, siphoning funds into Ophelia's vanity projects, leaving the company teetering. Catherine's health had worsened, and rumours suggested that Cornelius had almost entirely withdrawn from public life, humiliated by the family's fall from grace. One crisp autumn morning, Elizabeth stood on a balcony overlooking the city she once called home. She clutched a letter from Andrea, delivered by courier, containing a desperate plea. "Elizabeth, I know we have no right to ask, but our family is drowning. Daniel is beside himself, mother is sick, and father has lost hope. It feels like we're paying for all the terrible things we did. If there's anything you can do, or at least visit her, I'm sorry for everything." Elizabeth's mind raced. She knew, logically, that Addison Logistics' demise was not her responsibility. She owed them nothing. Yet memories of her wedding day, of her naive hopes, and the painful betrayal that followed, stirred within her. She wondered if closure, for them and for herself, necessitated a final act of reckoning. Perhaps it was time to see for herself the wreckage of the dynasty that once cast her aside. James, noticing her distant gaze, approached gently. "You're thinking about going, aren't you?" He knew her too well. She nodded. "I need to. I don't know what I'll do or say, but I need to see them one last time." Armed with a quiet resolve, Elizabeth travelled back to Rosemore and made her way to the Addison estate. The once imposing mansion appeared strangely diminished. The grand gate sagged, and the garden was overgrown. She pressed the doorbell, her stomach churning as a butler she'd never seen before let her in. Andrea greeted her in the foyer, eyes brimmed with exhaustion and relief. "You came," she whispered, ushering Elizabeth upstairs. The corridors were eerily silent, devoid of the staff that once bustled about. Artwork was missing from the walls, presumably sold to keep the family afloat. It felt like a relic of a crumbling empire. They stepped into Catherine Addison's suite, where the matriarch lay in bed, frail and ghostly pale. Cornelius stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. Daniel sat in a nearby armchair, shoulders slumped. At the sight of Elizabeth, his eyes flickered with a mixture of shame and longing. She met his gaze, recalling the man she once loved, now a shadow of himself. Catherine stirred, opening her eyes to see Elizabeth. The older woman's voice wavered. "Elizabeth, you came." Was that regret colouring her tone? Elizabeth drew closer, standing at the foot of the bed. She said nothing at first, simply taking in the sight of her former mother-in-law, who had once taken such pleasure in belittling her. Catherine closed her eyes, tears escaping down her cheeks. "I was cruel. I misunderstood you, but what I did, orchestrating that smear campaign, I don't expect forgiveness." A lump rose in Elizabeth's throat. She had dreamt of this moment, imagining how she'd lash out, remind them of every humiliation they'd heaped upon her. But standing there, seeing Catherine so diminished, the anger ebbed. Instead, she felt pity and a strange sense of peace. Daniel rose, trembling. "Elizabeth, he began, but words failed him. In the hollow depths of his eyes, she saw remorse. Once, he had been the center of her world, but the man before her now was lost, broken by his own greed and mistakes. Elizabeth inhaled slowly, her voice steady. "I'm not here to gloat. I'm here because Andrea reached out. I don't know what you expect from me, but I think it's time we put the past to rest." Catherine began to cry softly, murmuring apologies that Elizabeth never thought she'd hear. Cornelius, stoic as ever, only offered a nod of gratitude, perhaps too proud or too drained to say more. Daniel remained silent, head bowed. In that moment, Elizabeth realized that true power lay not in revenge, but in choosing compassion. She had built her empire, proven her worth, and carved out a destiny beyond their wildest imaginings. Nothing they could say or do now would change who she had become. And if pity felt more natural than vengeance, that was her choice, her power. Leaving the Addison estate, Elizabeth felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The ghosts of her past no longer haunted her. She had seen their suffering, their regrets, and had chosen empathy over retribution. It was a closure she hadn't realized she needed. Back at the Eleanor Rose headquarters, she refocused on the future. New collections were in the works, featuring collaborations with global artisans. A major media conglomerate offered to produce a documentary on Elizabeth's life and the brand's ethical initiatives. Dr. Porter and Malik hinted at a potential public offering for Eleanor Rose, which could transform it into one of the most influential fashion houses in the world. On a personal level, the connection between Elizabeth and James deepened. Late one evening, after a celebratory dinner marking Eleanor Rose's latest milestone, James walked her to her car. The night air was cool, and a gentle moon illuminated the sidewalk. They paused under a street lamp, hearts pounding with unspoken tension. "All this success, the world sees you as untouchable," James said, smiling. "But I know you're still the same caring, stubborn dreamer I met back in college." Elizabeth chuckled, her cheeks warm. "You've been my rock through everything. You never asked for anything in return." Her voice faltered, shy under his steady gaze. James took a breath, stepping closer. "I only want one thing," he said softly. Before Elizabeth could respond, he leaned in and kissed her, a tender moment that spoke of understanding, loyalty, and a love that had grown quietly over time. The next morning, Elizabeth arrived at the office with a bright smile she couldn't hide. Even her team noticed. She delved into a meeting with the board, discussing expansions into Europe and Asia. Halfway through, she received a phone call from Andrea Addison. Hesitant at first, she excused herself to answer in a quiet hallway. "Elizabeth," Andrea said, voice timid, I want to thank you for your kindness. Mother's condition is stable for now, and Father, he says he's sorry for everything. I'm thinking of stepping away from the Addison name to start something on my own. You've been an inspiration, believe it or not." Elizabeth felt an odd warmth in her chest. Once, the Addison name had towered over her life like an insurmountable fortress. Now it seemed she was the one people looked up to. She wished Andrea well, not sure if they'd ever be close, but glad to see her ex-sister-in-law choosing a path of independence. Shortly after, Elizabeth closed the deal for an additional line of sustainable accessories, culminating in a new label under the Eleanor Rose umbrella. She traveled frequently to oversee the partnerships, visiting women-led cooperatives and forging lasting friendships across continents. With each trip, her fortune and influence grew, and so did her commitment to uplift others. Yet, success did not erode her humility. She spent time mentoring young designers, sharing the story of how heartbreak and adversity shaped her vision. "Don't be afraid of failure or of betrayal," she often said in speeches. "They're painful, yes, but they can also awaken in you a strength you never knew you possessed." The day Eleanor Rose went public, the world watched as its stock soared, making Elizabeth a billionaire overnight. Journalists clamored to capture her reaction, but she remained poised. Her first move after the market closed was to donate a substantial amount of shares to her charitable foundation, ensuring that the wealth generated would flow back into programs supporting education, healthcare, and economic opportunities for marginalized communities. That evening, as the sun set behind glittering skyscrapers, Elizabeth returned to the small apartment she and James had started sharing. The living room was filled with congratulatory bouquets from well-wishers around the world. She found James on the balcony gazing at the city lights. "Hello, billionaire," he teased, pulling her into his arms. She laughed, nestling into his warmth. In that moment she felt a deep contentment, an understanding that real fulfillment wasn't just about financial triumph or besting those who once wronged her. It was about love, community, and using her hard-won success to create lasting positive change. Elizabeth Addison, once scorned, betrayed, and cast aside, had transcended every barrier placed before her. She had become a beacon of resilience, shining in a realm far beyond the Addison family's limited vision. And in the hush of that evening, as she looked into James's eyes, She realized that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living a life so full and beautiful that those who wronged you can only stand on the sidelines, watching in regret. Thank you for accompanying Elizabeth Addison on her extraordinary journey, from heartbreak to triumph, from a discarded wife to a compassionate billionaire, changing lives around the globe. Her story reminds us that betrayal can light a fire within us, driving us to unlock strengths we never knew we had. Even when the world turns its back, hope can be found in the kindness of friends, the guidance of mentors, and the unwavering belief in our own worth. If you found inspiration in Elizabeth's courage and determination, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Spread this story to those who may need a reminder that no betrayal, no setback, can stand in the way of a heart fueled by resilience and a mind brimming with ambition. Together, let's celebrate stories that uplift, empower, and remind us that we hold the power to forge our own destinies.